The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Red Cloud, Nebraska depot just as the afternoon sun turned the dusty streets into rivers of gold, and Penelope Russell stepped down with nothing but a carpetbag, a worn letter, and the sinking realization that the man who had promised to marry her was already 6 feet under. The driver, an older gentleman with a weathered face and kind eyes, helped her down and gave her a sympathetic look. "You the mail-order bride for William Henderson?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would bring her pain. "I am," Penelope said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Is he here to meet me?" The driver removed his hat and held it against his chest. "Miss, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but William Henderson passed on 3 weeks ago. Threw from a horse and broke his neck. The whole town mourned him. He was a good man." The world seemed to tilt beneath Penelope's feet. She had traveled all the way from Philadelphia, leaving behind a city that had nothing left for her after her parents died of typhoid fever and her brother's gambling debts forced the sale of their home. William's letters had been kind, promising her a fresh start in Nebraska, a home, and eventually a family. Now that hope lay buried in the ground, along with the man she had never met. "I see," she managed to say, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Thank you for telling me." The driver climbed back up to his seat, clearly uncomfortable with her grief. "The hotel is just down the street. Mrs. Patterson runs it. She might have a room available." Then he was gone, the stagecoach rattling away down the street, leaving Penelope standing alone in a town where she knew no one and had nowhere to go. She picked up her carpetbag and started walking toward what she hoped was the hotel, acutely aware of the curious stares from townspeople. Red Cloud was not a large town, maybe 2,000 people at most, and a stranger always drew attention. The main street was lined with wooden buildings, their false fronts reaching toward the sky in an attempt to appear grander than they were. She passed a general store, a saloon with the sound of a piano drifting through its doors, a blacksmith shop where the clang of hammer on anvil rang out in steady rhythm. The hotel was a 2-story building with a painted sign that read Patterson's Boarding House in cheerful yellow letters that seemed to mock her current situation. Penelope pushed through the door and found herself in a small lobby with a desk, a few chairs, and stairs leading to the upper floor. A woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun looked up from behind the desk. "Can I help you?" "I need a room," Penelope said, setting down her bag. "Just for tonight. Maybe a few nights. I'm not sure yet." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with recognition. "You're the girl who came for William Henderson, aren't you? I heard the stage was bringing you today. Oh, you poor dear. What a terrible thing to arrive and find such news waiting." Tears threatened to spill, but Penelope blinked them back. She had cried enough on the long journey from Philadelphia, mourning the loss of her old life. She would not cry now in front of a stranger, no matter how kind. "Do you have a room available?" "I do, but honey, I have to ask. Do you have money to pay for it?" Mrs. Patterson's question was not unkind, but it was direct, and Penelope appreciated that more than false sympathy. "I have a little," Penelope admitted. "Enough for maybe a week if I'm careful." After that, she had no idea what she would do. Return to Philadelphia? There was nothing there for her. Try to find work in Red Cloud? She had no skills that would be useful in a frontier town. She could read and write, play the piano, and run a household, but those were the accomplishments of a middle-class city girl, not a woman trying to survive in Nebraska. "A week might be enough time to figure things out," Mrs. Patterson said, reaching for a key hanging on a board behind her. "Room 4 upstairs. It's small but clean. Breakfast is included, but supper will cost extra if you want it." "Thank you," Penelope said, taking the key. "I appreciate your kindness." "We look out for each other here," Mrs. Patterson said. "Now, you go rest. You look like you've been traveling for days." Penelope climbed the stairs to room 4 and found it exactly as described. Small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a chair, and a window that overlooked the main street. She set her carpet bag on the chair and sat on the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of her situation. She was 22 years old, alone in a strange town, with no money to speak of and no prospects. The future stretched before her like the endless prairie outside her window, vast and terrifying in its emptiness. She did not cry, though. Crying would not change anything. Instead, she unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the basin, and changed from her traveling dress into something slightly less dusty. Then she lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to think of a plan. Sleep must have claimed her because she woke to darkness outside her window and the sound of voices and piano music from the saloon down the street. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since morning. She had two choices: spend money on supper at the boarding house or go to bed hungry and save what little she had. In the end, hunger won, and she went downstairs to find Mrs. Patterson in a small dining room off the lobby, serving stew and bread to a handful of boarders. "There you are," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "Sit down, dear. I saved you a bowl." Penelope sat at the communal table and accepted the steaming bowl of beef stew with gratitude. The other boarders, all men who worked in town or on nearby ranches, nodded politely but did not speak to her, for which she was grateful. She ate quickly and returned to her room, exhausted from travel and emotion. The next morning brought bright sunshine, and the realization that she needed to find work immediately. After breakfast, she asked Mrs. Patterson if there were any jobs available in town. "Well, let me think, Mrs." Patterson said, tapping her chin. "The general store might need help, and the school teacher, Miss Hawkins, has been talking about wanting an assistant. You could try the saloon, but I don't recommend that for a respectable girl like yourself." "Thank you," Penelope said. "I'll try the general store first." She spent the morning walking through Red Cloud, asking at every business if they needed help. The general store did not need anyone. Neither did the seamstress, the barber, or the newspaper office. The school teacher, Miss Hawkins, was interested but explained that the town could not afford to pay an assistant's salary. By noon, Penelope's hope was fading, replaced by a gnawing fear that she would end up on the street with nowhere to go. She was walking back toward the boarding house, trying to figure out her next move, when she heard a commotion near the livery stable. A horse was rearing and bucking, its rider trying desperately to stay in the saddle. A crowd had gathered to watch, some shouting advice, others placing bets on whether the cowboy would get thrown. Penelope stopped to watch, drawn by the excitement and the grace of the rider, who seemed to move with the horse rather than against it. He was tall and lean, with dark hair visible beneath his hat and broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard work. After several more bucks and twists, the horse finally calmed, standing still and breathing hard. The cowboy dismounted smoothly and patted the horse's neck, speaking to it in a low, soothing voice. The crowd dispersed, the show over, and Penelope continued walking. She had only gone a few steps when she heard a voice behind her. "Excuse me, miss." She turned to find the cowboy from the livery stable, his hat now in his hand, revealing a face that was handsome in a rugged, weathered way. He looked to be in his late 20s, with gray eyes that held a directness she found both unsettling and reassuring. There was dust on his clothes and a small cut on his cheek, probably from a branch or a stray hoof. "Yes?" Penelope said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I don't mean to be forward, but I overheard you asking about work at the general store earlier. You're new in town?" "I am," Penelope admitted, wondering where this conversation was going. "I arrived yesterday." He nodded, as if confirming something he already suspected. "I'm Samuel Dalton. I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, passed away 2 months ago. And I've been managing on my own, but I'm running out of clean clothes and the house is a mess. I need someone who can cook, clean, and keep things organized. It's hard work, and the ranch is isolated, but the pay is fair, and room and board are included." Penelope stared at him, trying to process the offer. A housekeeper position on a ranch would solve her immediate problems, but accepting would mean living alone on a ranch with a man she did not know. It was hardly proper, though she supposed propriety was a luxury she could no longer afford. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Dalton, but wouldn't it be inappropriate for me to live on your ranch unchaperoned? Samuel Dalton's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been respect. That's a fair concern. Mrs. Chen was 70 years old and nobody questioned her living at the ranch. But you're young, and I understand that creates a different situation. The truth is, I have 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, so you wouldn't be alone with me, and you'd have your own room in the main house with a lock on the door. I give you my word that I'm offering you work, nothing more. His words were direct and honest, and Penelope found herself wanting to trust him. More than that, she needed to trust him because the alternative was running out of money and ending up with nowhere to go. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, Samuel said. I'll be in town until tomorrow morning. You can find me at the saloon if you want to talk more, or if you decide to accept. Meet me at the livery stable at sunrise. We'll head out to the ranch together. He put his hat back on, tipped it politely, and walked away, leaving Penelope standing in the street with a decision that could change everything. She spent the rest of the day weighing her options, which were depressingly few. Mrs. Patterson, when Penelope told her about the offer, was cautiously supportive. Samuel Dalton is a good man, the older woman said. He's been ranching out there for about 5 years now, built the whole operation up from nothing. He keeps to himself mostly, but he's never caused trouble in town. His word is solid. If he says you'll be safe, I believe him. But is it wise? Penelope asked. I don't know anything about keeping house on a ranch. Honey, you don't have many choices right now, Mrs. Patterson said gently. You can stay here and hope something else comes along, but I'll be honest with you. Jobs are scarce in Red Cloud, especially for women. Most girls your age are already married or working for family. Samuel's offer might be the best chance you've got. That night, Penelope lay awake in her small room and thought about the crossroads she had reached. She could be cautious and careful, staying in town and hoping for a miracle, or she could take a chance on a stranger who had offered her exactly what she needed: work, shelter, and a way to survive. By morning, she had made her decision. She met Samuel Dalton at the livery stable just as the sun was painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. He was loading supplies into a wagon and looked up as she approached with her carpet bag. I accept your offer, Penelope said. I'll work as your housekeeper. A small smile crossed his face, the first real expression of emotion she had seen from him. I'm glad. I think you'll find the ranch suits you. It's peaceful out there, away from town. He helped her into the wagon, and they set off down the dusty road that led out of Red Cloud. The town fell away behind them, replaced by rolling prairie that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Wildflowers dotted the grassland, and birds sang from fence posts as they passed. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of sage and earth. Samuel drove in silence for a while, and Penelope used the time to study him. He had strong hands that held the reins with easy confidence, and he sat relaxed on the wagon seat, clearly comfortable in this landscape. There was something solid about him, something that spoke of reliability and strength. She found herself thinking that William Henderson might have been like this, and the thought brought a pang of sadness for the life she would never have with the man she had traveled so far to marry. You were supposed to marry William Henderson, Samuel said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. I heard about it in town. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, Penelope said quietly, though I suppose you can't truly lose someone you never knew. I feel more foolish than sad. I came all this way for a man I only knew through letters. That doesn't make your grief less real, Samuel said. You lost the future you thought you were going to have. That's worth mourning. His understanding surprised her, and she glanced at him with new curiosity. Did you know William? A little. He came into town sometimes for supplies. He seemed like a decent man. I'm sorry things turned out the way they did. They rode in comfortable silence after that, and Penelope found herself relaxing slightly. Samuel Dalton might be a stranger, but he did not seem dangerous. If anything, he seemed almost shy, keeping his eyes on the road and his thoughts to himself. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a windmill visible above the prairie grass, then as a collection of buildings clustered together in the vast emptiness. The main house was a sturdy wooden structure with a covered porch and windows that gleamed in the morning light. Near it stood a barn, a chicken coop, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and several horses stood in a corral, lifting their heads to watch the wagons approach. "Welcome to the Dalton Ranch," Samuel said, bringing the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "It's not much, but it's home." To Penelope, who had grown up in a cramped Philadelphia row house and had spent the last night sleeping in a tiny boarding house room, the ranch looked spacious and beautiful. She climbed down from the wagon and looked around, taking in the wide blue sky, the endless prairie, and the sense of space that was both exhilarating and slightly frightening. 3 men emerged from the bunkhouse, drawn by the sound of the wagon. Samuel introduced them as his ranch hands: Carlos, a Mexican man in his 40s with a warm smile; Tom, a young man barely out of his teens with red hair and freckles; and Henry, a quiet black man in his 30s who nodded politely but did not speak. They all looked at Penelope with curiosity, but also with a respect that put her at ease. "This is Miss Penelope Russell," Samuel told them. "She's going to be our new housekeeper. I expect you all to treat her with courtesy and respect." "Yes, sir," they chorused, and Carlos added, "It will be nice to have good cooking again. No offense, boss, but your biscuits could be used as ammunition." The other men laughed, and even Samuel's mouth twitched with amusement. The easy camaraderie between them told Penelope that Samuel was a fair employer, the kind of man who inspired loyalty rather than fear. Samuel showed Penelope into the house, which was indeed in desperate need of a woman's touch. Dust covered every surface, dirty dishes were piled in the kitchen, and clothes were scattered across furniture. But the bones of the house were good, with sturdy furniture, a large kitchen with a proper stove, and windows that let in plenty of light. "Your room is upstairs," Samuel said, leading her up a narrow staircase to a small bedroom that was clean and simply furnished. "I apologize for the state of the rest of the house. I've been meaning to clean, but with the ranch work, there's never enough time." "It's fine," Penelope said, setting down her carpet bag. "I'll have it sorted out in no time." "I'm sure you will," Samuel said. "Take today to get settled. Tomorrow you can start with whatever you think needs doing first. I'll be out working with the cattle most days, but if you need anything, just ring the bell on the porch and someone will come." He left her alone to unpack, and Penelope stood in her new room, looking out the window at the prairie that surrounded the ranch on all sides. She was miles from town, living with strangers, and embarking on work she had never done before. But for the first time since arriving in Nebraska, she felt a small spark of hope. She had a job, a roof over her head, and a chance to build a new life. It was more than she had yesterday. She spent the rest of the day exploring the house and making a mental list of everything that needed to be done. The kitchen was her first priority, so she rolled up her sleeves and started washing dishes, scrubbing the stove, and sweeping the floor. By evening, the kitchen was clean, and she had managed to make a simple supper of fried salt pork, beans, and cornbread. She rang the bell on the porch, and the 4 men appeared, looking surprised and pleased. "It smells amazing," Tom said enthusiastically as they all sat down at the table. "Don't get your hopes up too high," Penelope warned. "I'm not a fancy cook, but I can manage the basics." But the men ate as if she had prepared a feast, and Carlos declared it the best meal they had eaten in months. Samuel said little, but he finished everything on his plate and gave her a nod of approval that felt like high praise. After supper, the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse, and Samuel helped Penelope clear the table, which surprised her. "You don't have to do that," she said. "It's my job." "I don't mind," Samuel replied. "I'm not the kind of man who expects to be waited on hand and foot." They worked in silence, washing and drying dishes, and Penelope found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her. He was tall enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes, and there was a quiet strength about him that she found comforting. When the last dish was put away, he thanked her and went outside to check on the horses, leaving Penelope alone in the clean kitchen. She climbed the stairs to her room and lay down on the bed, exhausted but satisfied. Her first day at the Dalton Ranch had gone well. If she could keep this up, she might actually make a life for herself here. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Penelope woke early each morning, made breakfast for the men, and spent her days cleaning, mending and learning the routines of ranch life. She discovered that keeping house on a ranch was very different from running a city household. Water had to be drawn from the well, food had to be preserved carefully in the root cellar, and laundry was an all-day affair that left her arms aching. But she found satisfaction in the work, in transforming the neglected house into a clean, comfortable home. Samuel was a quiet employer, often gone from dawn until dusk, working with the cattle or mending fences. But when he was around, he was unfailingly polite and respectful, always thanking her for meals and asking if she needed anything from town. She noticed small things about him. The way he always removed his boots at the door without being asked, how he spoke gently to the horses, the careful way he handled tools and equipment. He was a man who took pride in doing things right, and she respected that. The ranch hands became her unexpected friends. Carlos taught her how to make tortillas and told her stories about growing up in Mexico. Tom was full of youthful enthusiasm and terrible jokes that somehow always made her laugh. Henry was quieter, but he often left wildflowers on the kitchen table that he had picked during his rounds, a silent gesture of appreciation that touched her deeply. 3 weeks after arriving at the ranch, Penelope was hanging laundry on the clothesline when she heard the thunder of hooves. She looked up to see Samuel riding hard toward the house, and even from a distance she could tell something was wrong. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped and strode toward her, his face grim. "There's a storm coming," he said, "a bad one. We need to get the cattle into the near pasture and secure everything. Can you help bring the horses into the barn?" "Of course," Penelope said, dropping the sheet she had been hanging and following him toward the corral. The sky, which had been clear and blue an hour ago, was now darkening in the west, a wall of black clouds rolling toward them with terrifying speed. The wind was picking up, whipping Penelope's skirts around her legs and carrying the scent of rain. Samuel and the ranch hands worked with urgent efficiency, riding out to move the cattle while Penelope herded the horses into the barn. The animals sensed the approaching storm and were skittish, but she managed to get them all inside and close the heavy barn doors. By the time she ran back to the house, the first fat drops of rain were falling. The storm hit with a fury that Penelope had never experienced. Rain lashed the windows, wind howled around the house, and thunder crashed so loudly it shook the walls. She stood at the kitchen window watching for the men and praying they made it back safely. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the prairie in stark white flashes. Finally, she saw them riding toward the house, 4 figures bent against the wind and rain. They headed for the bunkhouse, but Samuel broke away and ran to the main house, bursting through the door, soaking wet and breathing hard. "Everyone's safe," he said, answering the question in her eyes. "The cattle are secure and the men are in the bunkhouse. This is going to blow for a while. We just have to wait it out." Penelope grabbed a towel and handed it to him. "You're soaked through. You should change into dry clothes before you catch your death." He nodded and disappeared upstairs, returning a few minutes later in dry clothes with his wet hair slicked back from his face. The storm continued to rage outside, and Penelope put coffee on to boil, needing something to do with her hands. "That was frightening," she admitted. "Do storms like this happen often?" "A few times a year," Samuel said, accepting a cup of coffee. "Spring and summer are the worst. This was a fast mover, though. It should pass by morning." They sat at the kitchen table, listening to the storm and sipping coffee. Without his hat and with his guard down, Samuel looked younger and less intimidating. Penelope found herself curious about him, about the man who had offered her work when she had nowhere else to go. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why did you offer me the job? You could have hired anyone." "Why me?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I saw you walking through town that morning, and I could see you were afraid, not scared of the town or the people, but afraid of what would happen to you. I recognize that fear because I felt it once myself when I first came west. I had nothing, no money, no prospects, just a desperate need to make something of myself. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most, and I figured maybe I could do the same for you." His honesty disarmed her, and she felt something shift in her perception of him. He was not just her employer. He was a man who understood what it meant to be lost and alone. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't offered me this job." "You would have figured something out," Samuel said with certainty. "You're stronger than you think." The storm raged on through the night, and Penelope slept fitfully, waking at every crack of thunder. By morning, the sky had cleared, leaving the prairie washed clean and sparkling in the sunshine. The damage was minimal, a few fence posts down, some shingles blown off the barn roof, and everyone set to work making repairs. Life continued, and as spring turned to summer, Penelope found herself settling into her new life in a way she had never expected. The ranch began to feel like home, and the men she lived and worked with began to feel like family. She learned to bake bread, to preserve vegetables, to tell the difference between the sounds the cattle made. She grew stronger from the physical work, her hands developing calluses and her skin tanning from the sun. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, her relationship with Samuel began to change. It started with small things, the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she was not looking, the way he always made sure she got the best piece of meat at dinner, the way he started coming back to the house at midday to check if she needed anything. She found herself looking forward to the evenings when the ranch hands would leave, and it was just the two of them in the house talking over coffee about everything and nothing. One evening in early July, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie when Samuel said, "I'm glad you came here, Penelope. The house feels like a home again." "I'm glad too," she said honestly. "I never expected to find peace here, but I have." "It suits you, this life," Samuel observed. "I know it's not what you were raised for, but you've taken to it." "I think maybe I was looking for this all along and just did not know it," Penelope said. "In Philadelphia, I always felt like I was trying to fit into a mold that was not meant for me. Here, I can just be myself." Samuel turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious in the fading light. "Who are you, Penelope Russell?" It was a strange question, but she understood what he was asking. "I'm someone who is still figuring that out, but I think I'm someone who is stronger than she thought, someone who can survive and even thrive when everything falls apart, someone who is grateful for second chances." "I'm grateful too," Samuel said quietly, "for second chances and for unexpected blessings." The air between them felt charged with something unspoken, and Penelope's heart began to beat faster. She knew in that moment that her feelings for Samuel had grown beyond respect and gratitude into something deeper and more complicated. She was falling in love with her employer, with the quiet cowboy who had given her a home when she had nowhere else to go. But she did not speak of it, afraid of disrupting the careful balance they had achieved. Instead, she said goodnight and went inside, leaving Samuel alone on the porch with his thoughts. The summer heat intensified, and with it came longer days and harder work. The cattle needed to be moved to different pastures, the hay needed to be cut and stored, and the garden Penelope had planted required constant watering. She fell into bed each night exhausted but content, her life on the ranch feeling more real than anything she had experienced in Philadelphia. In August, Samuel had to make a trip to Omaha to sell cattle, a journey that would take him away for nearly 2 weeks. Carlos and Henry went with him, leaving Tom behind to watch the ranch with Penelope. "I don't like leaving you," Samuel said the morning he left, and there was something in his voice that made Penelope's breath catch. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Tom and I can manage for 2 weeks." "I know you can," Samuel said, "but I'll miss you anyway." He rode away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the yard with her heart pounding and 1,000 questions racing through her mind. Did he mean what she thought he meant, or was he simply being kind to his housekeeper? The 2 weeks passed slowly. Tom was good company, but the ranch felt empty without Samuel, Carlos, and Henry. Penelope threw herself into her work, cleaning every corner of the house, preserving vegetables from the garden, and sewing new curtains for the kitchen windows. At night she lay awake and thought about Samuel, about the way his smile could light up his whole face, about the strength in his hands and the gentleness in his voice. She was definitely in love with him, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. When Samuel returned, tanned and tired from 2 weeks on the trail, Penelope had to restrain herself from running to greet him. Instead, she stood on the porch and waved as he rode in, her heart soaring at the sight of him. That night after supper and after the other men had left, Samuel lingered in the kitchen while Penelope cleaned up. "I did a lot of thinking while I was gone," he said suddenly. Penelope's hands stilled in the dishwater. "About what?" "About this ranch, about my life, about what I want for the future." She turned to face him, her heart hammering. "And what do you want?" Samuel crossed the room until he was standing right in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his gray eyes. "I want you to stay, Penelope. Not as a housekeeper, but as my wife. I know it's not proper to propose like this, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just gratitude. I'm in love with you. I think I have been since the day I saw you in town, looking lost and scared, but still holding your head high. You're the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever met, and I don't want to spend another day without telling you that." Penelope could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You love me?" "I do," Samuel said simply. "I love everything about you. The way you sing while you cook, the way you've made this house a home, the way you're kind to everyone, the way you never give up even when things are hard. I know I'm just a rancher and I can't give you the kind of life you had in Philadelphia, but I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you happy." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "Samuel, I don't want the life I had in Philadelphia. I want this life here with you. I love you too. I have for months now, but I was afraid to say anything." The smile that spread across Samuel's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. He reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb, his touch so tender it made her heart ache. "You mean it?" he asked. "You'll marry me?" "Yes," Penelope said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Penelope rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She had come to Nebraska as a mail-order bride for a man she never met, had arrived with nowhere to go and no future in sight. But Samuel Dalton had given her more than a job and a roof over her head. He had given her a home, a purpose, and now a future filled with love. He tilted her face up and kissed her, gentle at first and then with growing passion, and Penelope kissed him back with all the love and gratitude in her heart. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless and smiling. "When can we get married?" Samuel asked. "As soon as possible," Penelope said. "I don't want to wait." "Neither do I," Samuel agreed. "We'll go into town tomorrow and talk to the pastor. We can have a simple ceremony, just us and the ranch hands as witnesses, if that's all right with you." "That sounds perfect," Penelope said. "I don't need anything fancy. I just need you." They stayed up late that night, sitting on the porch and making plans, talking about everything they had never said before. Samuel told her about growing up in Kansas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 19 and heading west to start over. He told her about the 5 years he had spent building the ranch, about the lonely nights and the constant work, about how he had started to wonder if he would spend his whole life alone. Penelope told him about Philadelphia, about her parents, and the good years before they got sick, about her brother's gambling and the loss of their home, about answering William Henderson's advertisement in desperation. She told him about the fear she had felt stepping off that stagecoach, about thinking she had made the biggest mistake of her life. "But it wasn't a mistake," Samuel said, taking her hand. "It brought you here, to me." "No," Penelope agreed, lacing her fingers through his. "It wasn't a mistake. It was fate." They went to Red Cloud the next day and spoke with Pastor Williams, who agreed to marry them that very Saturday, just 3 days away. The news spread through town quickly, and by the time they left the church, half of Red Cloud seemed to know that Samuel Dalton was marrying his housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson cornered Penelope at the general store, beaming with delight. "I knew it," she declared. I told my husband that Samuel Dalton was smitten with you the moment he offered you that job. Oh, honey, I'm so happy for you. You deserve this." Penelope hugged the older woman, touched by her genuine joy. "Thank you for being kind to me when I first arrived. I'll never forget it." "You're a good girl," Mrs. Patterson said. "Samuel is lucky to have you." Saturday arrived sunny and warm. Perfect weather for a wedding. Penelope wore a simple blue dress that she had brought from Philadelphia, and Samuel wore his best clothes, looking so handsome that her breath caught when she saw him waiting at the front of the church. The ranch hands were there, along with Mrs. Patterson, the livery stable owner, and a handful of other townspeople who had come to wish them well. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony in the small church, his voice ringing out clear and strong as he spoke the ancient words that would bind Penelope and Samuel together. When it came time for the vows, Samuel took her hands and looked into her eyes with such love that she felt tears threatening again. "I, Samuel Dalton, take you, Penelope Russell, to be my wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and stand by you through whatever life brings us. You came to me when you had nowhere else to go, and I promise that you'll never have to leave. This ranch is your home now and forever." His words were the most beautiful thing Penelope had ever heard, and when it was her turn, she spoke from the heart. "I, Penelope Russell, take you, Samuel Dalton, to be my husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and build a life with you." Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, and Samuel kissed her in front of everyone, sealing their vows with tenderness and passion. The small congregation applauded, and Carlos let out a whoop of joy that made everyone laugh. They celebrated with a simple meal at the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson having insisted on providing a wedding supper. There was roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables, fresh bread, and even a cake that the baker had made as a wedding gift. The ranch hands toasted the couple with whiskey, and Tom made a speech about how happy they all were to have Penelope as part of the ranch family permanently. As the sun began to set, Samuel and Penelope rode back to the ranch in the wagon, now officially husband and wife. The prairie stretched around them, painted gold and pink by the dying light, and Penelope felt a sense of peace and rightness that she had never experienced before. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked, glancing at her. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Penelope answered honestly. "Are you?" "More than you could know," Samuel said. "I spent so many years alone, thinking maybe I was meant to live that way. And then you showed up, and suddenly everything made sense. You made my house a home, Penelope. You made my life worth living." She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her, pulling her close as the wagon rolled toward their ranch, toward their future. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Samuel made love to his wife with a tenderness and passion that took her breath away. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, and Penelope thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west to marry one man and ended up marrying another. She had thought she had nowhere to go, but Samuel had made sure she never had to leave. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Samuel replied, kissing her forehead. "Always." The seasons changed and life on the ranch continued, but now Penelope was not just the housekeeper, but the lady of the house, Samuel's wife and partner in all things. She threw herself into making the ranch prosper, helping with the books, managing the household with increasing efficiency, and even learning to ride so she could help move cattle when needed. In the spring of 1882, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She told Samuel one evening after supper, and the look of joy on his face was something she would treasure forever. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight before carefully setting her down and apologizing for being too rough. "I'm not made of glass," Penelope said, laughing. "But yes, we're going to have a baby." Samuel placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, his eyes full of wonder. A baby. Our baby. The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months and found the summer heat oppressive as her belly grew. But Samuel was attentive and caring, always making sure she rested and never let her work too hard. The ranch hands pitched in to help with household tasks, and Carlos's wife, Maria, who lived in Red Cloud, came out several times to check on Penelope and offer advice. In November, during a cold snap that brought the first snow of the season, Penelope went into labor. Doctor. Mitchell from Red Cloud had been staying at the ranch for the past week, waiting for this moment, and Samuel sent Tom riding to town to fetch Maria to help with the delivery. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Samuel paced the floor downstairs, unable to sit still, while the doctor and Maria tended to Penelope upstairs. He could hear her cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. Carlos and Henry tried to distract him with conversation, but nothing helped until finally in the late afternoon he heard a new sound, the wail of a newborn baby. Dr. Mitchell appeared at the top of the stairs smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Dalton. You have a son, a healthy, strong boy, and your wife did wonderfully. She's tired, but fine." Samuel took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the bedroom to find Penelope propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son's red, wrinkled face. "He's perfect," Samuel breathed. "He is," Penelope agreed, smiling up at her husband. "Do you want to hold him?" Samuel carefully took the baby, cradling him with surprising gentleness for such large, work-roughened hands. The infant opened his eyes and seemed to look directly at his father, and Samuel felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it almost frightened him. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked. "What about James?" Samuel suggested. "After your father." Tears filled Penelope's eyes. "You remembered." "Of course I did," Samuel said. "James Russell Dalton. What do you think?" "I think it's perfect," Penelope said. Little James thrived, growing fat and healthy under his mother's care. Penelope discovered that motherhood came naturally to her, and she loved everything about it, even the sleepless nights and constant demands. Samuel was a devoted father, often coming in from the fields just to hold his son, singing to him in a low voice while Penelope watched with a full heart. The ranch continued to prosper. With careful management and hard work, Samuel was able to expand his herd and buy more land. He hired 2 more ranch hands, and the Dalton Ranch became known throughout the region as a well-run operation with quality cattle. When James was 2 years old, Penelope found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter in the summer of 1885. They named her Margaret, after Samuel's mother, and she was a beautiful baby with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of seasons passing and children growing. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved following his father around the ranch, while Margaret was spirited and adventurous, always getting into mischief. 2 years after Margaret came another son, William, named for the man whose death had inadvertently brought Penelope and Samuel together. It seemed fitting to honor him, to acknowledge that without his untimely passing, they might never have found each other. The ranch hands came and went over the years, but Carlos, Tom, and Henry stayed, becoming like family. Carlos eventually brought his wife Maria to live on the ranch, and they raised their own children alongside the Dalton children. Tom married a girl from town and built a small house on ranch property, and Henry found happiness with a widow who owned the boarding house after Mrs. Patterson retired. Penelope never forgot those first frightening days in Red Cloud, when she had arrived with nowhere to go and no idea what would become of her. She often thought about the twist of fate that had brought her west, about William Henderson and the life that never was, about the moment Samuel Dalton had offered her a job and changed everything. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel gave Penelope a beautiful cameo necklace that he had ordered from Omaha. They were sitting on the porch after the children were in bed, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, when he fastened it around her neck. "It's beautiful," Penelope said, touching the delicate carving. "Not as beautiful as you," Samuel said, pulling her close. "Do you ever regret it? Staying here, marrying me this life?" Never, Penelope said without hesitation. This is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me a home, Samuel. You gave me a family. You gave me love. How could I regret any of that? I'm the one who should be grateful, Samuel said. You walked into my life and made everything better. You made this house a home. You gave me children and laughter and purpose. I was just existing before you came along. You taught me how to truly live. They sat together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, comfortable in the silence that comes from years of shared life. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them, the lowing of cattle in the distance, the chirp of crickets in the grass, the soft whinny of horses in the barn. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. Do you remember what I said in my vows? Samuel asked. That you had nowhere else to go, but I would make sure you never had to leave? I remember, Penelope said softly. I meant it then, and I mean it now, Samuel said. This is your home, Penelope. For as long as you live, for as long as I live and beyond. This land, this ranch, this family, it's all yours. You never have to leave, and I pray you never want to. I don't want to, Penelope assured him. This is where I belong, with you, with our children on this ranch. I found my place in the world, Samuel, and it's right here beside you. He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and Penelope thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. She had boarded a stagecoach in Philadelphia as a desperate woman with no future, had arrived in Red Cloud as a mail order bride for a dead man, and had ended up finding true love with a cowboy who saw past her fear to the strength underneath. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all lives do. They lost Tom to a riding accident when he was only 40, and the whole ranch mourned him. Carlos and Maria eventually retired to Red Cloud, and Henry became Samuel's foreman, proving himself more than capable of running the day-to-day operations. James grew into a fine young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. And when he turned 21, Samuel made him a full partner in the operation. Margaret, spirited and independent, married a school teacher from Hastings and moved there to start her own family, though she visited often. William, the youngest, decided he wanted to be a doctor and went east to medical school, making his parents proud. Penelope and Samuel grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering like the land they loved. But their love never faded. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something solid and unshakable, a foundation upon which everything else was built. On a warm evening in June of 1901, nearly 20 years after their wedding, Penelope and Samuel sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. James and his wife had 3 children now, and they lived in a house that Samuel had helped build just a quarter-mile from the main house. Margaret was visiting with her 4 children, and the sounds of childish laughter filled the air. "We've built something good here," Samuel said, reaching for Penelope's hand. "We have," Penelope agreed, squeezing his fingers. "A legacy, a family, a home." "I still can't believe you chose me," Samuel said, something he had said many times over the years. A poor cowboy with nothing but a ranch and a dream. "You were never poor," Penelope corrected him gently. "You were rich in all the ways that matter. You had kindness, integrity, strength, and love to give. You gave me everything when I had nothing. You made sure I never had to leave when I had nowhere else to go. And you made my life complete," Samuel said. "Every day with you has been a gift." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset and the children, reflecting on the life they had built together. The ranch had grown from a simple operation to one of the most successful in the region. But more than that, it had become a true home, filled with love and laughter, a place where family gathered and memories were made. Penelope thought back to that terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Red Cloud so many years ago, and she barely recognized her. That woman had been lost and afraid with no idea what the future held. But this woman, this Penelope Dalton, knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a rancher's partner, and a woman who had found her strength in the most unlikely of places, As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, James called his children inside for supper, and Margaret gathered her brood as well. The yard emptied, and it was just Penelope and Samuel again, as it had been in the beginning. "I love you," Samuel said, as he did every night. "I love you too," Penelope replied, as she always had and always would. They went inside together, hand in hand, into the house that had started as shelter and become a home. The house where they had raised their children, weathered storms both literal and figurative, celebrated joys and mourned losses. The house where a mail-order bride with nowhere else to go had found everything she had ever wanted with a cowboy who made sure she never had to leave. And as they climbed the stairs to bed that night, Penelope offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the strange and winding path that had led her here, for the twist of fate that had brought her west, and for the man who had seen her not as she was, but as she could be. Samuel Dalton had given her more than a home. He had given her a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch would continue, passed down through generations of Daltons who would work the land and raise cattle and build their own lives on this Nebraska prairie. And somewhere in the stories they told their children and grandchildren would be the tale of how it all began, with a frightened woman, a kind cowboy, and a love that grew from the simplest of beginnings into something extraordinary. As Penelope drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in her husband's arms as she had been for nearly 20 years, she smiled. She had come to Nebraska with nothing and had found everything. She had been a mail-order bride who arrived to find her intended groom dead, with nowhere else to go and no future in sight. But Samuel Dalton had changed all that. He had offered her work when she needed it, friendship when she was alone, and love when she least expected it. And true to his word on their wedding day, he had made sure she never had to leave. The Dalton Ranch was her home, now and forever, and there was nowhere else in the world she would rather be. The desperate journey from Philadelphia, the heartbreak of arriving too late, the fear of an uncertain future, all of it had been worth it because it had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this love. And that, Penelope thought as sleep claimed her, was the greatest gift of all. Not just a home or security or even the beautiful children and grandchildren they had been blessed with, but the knowledge that she was loved completely and unconditionally by a man who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway. A man who had promised she would never have to leave and had spent every day since proving that promise true. The prairie wind whispered through the grass outside, carrying with it the sounds of cattle settling for the night, horses shifting in their stalls, and the distant call of an owl. The ranch slept, secure and peaceful under the vast Nebraska sky, and in the main house Samuel and Penelope Dalton slept as well, their lives intertwined as completely as their fingers, their story a testament to the power of compassion, second chances, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings into something that would endure forever.